All right, Jason, thank you for jumping on the podcast today. I saw a video that was really on point, and I believe it's called Three Ways to Lose a Good Woman. And we were talking about it before we hit record. So let's just jump into that. For anyone who hasn't seen it, go to Jason's page. What's your handle, really quick?
It's Jason Schnitzer coaching.
Yes, hit the pause button. Check out this video. It's pinned on his page. Give us a little refresh, and then let's dive into that. This episode is sponsored by Black Label Meat. Black Label Meat only sells premium quality meat that is grass fed, grass finished, and they do regenerative grazing practices. Check them out now, blacklabelmeatcompany.com, and use the code Jesse for 10% off.
Yeah. So 3 ways to lose a good woman. And really, I like to stick to the second two, but the things that I said is number one, taking her for granted. When you start putting other things in front of her, and it's, over the course of a long-term relationship, it's easy to kind of get caught up in the hustle and bustle, whether that be your hobbies, your work, the kids, etc., to have the relationship fall off as the top one or at least three priorities in your life. And the other two, which I really think are key for a lot of men, and kind of like where I feel like at least the clients I work with are caught up in and see themselves in a cycle of, is number one, not being able to provide what we'll call like emotional safety for your wife or for your long-term partner. And essentially what that means is her being able to like have feelings and you being able to like sit with them without needing to fix them.
Mm.
And the last thing would be, so emotional, catch myself here. We've got taking her for granted, emotional safety, and it's escaping me. Jesse, help me. What was number three?
So the third one
Oh,
was
yeah. Happy wife, happy life.
yeah.
Yeah. And this is like one of those things where, I mean, I'm sure you've heard the term, and so many people hear the terms. It's like, yeah, man, just like happy wife, happy life. And they think by, doing things like saying yes no matter what, or
Mm.
just telling her what she wants to hear, that is like the one way ticket to like creating a happy marriage long term. And that's just like almost as far from the case as can be. And it can be so confusing for dudes in long term relationships when like this is kind of like the mantra or motto they live by. And then like eventually it almost is like the number one thing that leads to like the demise of the relationship.
Yeah, I heard a great, um, a great little saying that was "Happy husband ain't no one fucking fussing," and it's like, and I like that one way better because I know that if I'm as happy as I can be, my
Mm,
wife is as happy as she can be with us being yoked.
mhm,
Um, if we're truly like in sync with each other of
mhm,
where we're going in life, me being in that masculine role, her being in her most feminine state where she feels most like safe and secure, her cortisol levels are under control. um, there was a point, for gosh, 6 years ago when my son was like 1 and 2, where your number one part, where I was just into my hobbies, flying around the country trying to build a business. I was going hunting, and I really put my wife on the back burner
mhm.
for about those 2 years. And I had no idea until she like was like, "What the f?"
Mm,
And then taking that step back and was like, "Yeah, you're right. Like I've put my hobbies, my gym, the building this business because I would travel way in front of our relationship.
mhm.
That was definitely a low point. Um, so keep going on with some of these number the 1 through 3, because I think it's so important that even if they don't actually lose her through divorce or breakup, they're going to lose that relationship and just be strangers and roommates.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's so true, Jesse, and thanks for sharing that. And yeah, a lot of the times like where I find men is like they're kind of in that point that you like just shared, which is
Mm-hmm.
kind of like you kind of just get busy with life thinking you're headed in the right direction or doing the things that you need to do, either based on like what you want to do or what other people are telling you should be doing. And then all of a sudden you wake up one day and your wife's like, "What the F?" And you're like, "Where did
Yeah,
this come from? This is almost like it's out of nowhere." Right?
it's so true.
Yeah. And then like all of a sudden all the little things become the big things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, maybe you're getting a little more agitated and you're noticing that you're going from 0 to 100 and you don't know why. And a lot of times it's like, well, things were great and now they're not all of a sudden, but it's like this slow, I don't want to call it erosion, but it's life gets more complicated, right? And a lot of times it's because we do that to ourselves, right? We want
Mm-hmm.
to build the business bigger. We want to move into the bigger house. We want, different lifestyles. And we also do things like have kids.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's like even just one kid, two kids, three kids, however many kids, it's like um, I call them little dysregulation grenades because I talk
Mm-hmm.
a lot about the nervous system and how that impacts your life and especially your long-term relationships. And what you're doing essentially is you're taking something that is it's not destructive because we love little babies, but it's very destructive to the homeostasis that you and your family unit has built over however many years, and you are completely changing that. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is like the more complicated we make our lives, the more it pressure tests your system. And you can
Yeah.
think of like your system as like, just like your relationship with your wife. It's like, what things do you have set up in place, fail stops to make sure like that you are, putting eggs in the basket and nurturing that connection over time, because it's so easy to think that just because you're in proximity to someone, that means like you guys are close.
Yeah. And then but you can be in proximity, but you're actually just roommates.
Yeah.
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 One of the, I have a little, you could say, Excel spreadsheet, a little document that I give guys who I coach. And one of the big things is spending 90 minutes minimum a week with their spouse, just
Mm.
talking about how the household's being run. And
Mm-hmm.
then also dates or micro dates.
Mm.
And people will say, how do I fit all this in?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, bud, there are men way busier than both you and I,
Yeah.
and they have a way better relationship with their spouse.
Mm.
They have kids. They're running $100 million business, and they have the same amount of minutes in a day that I have and you have. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's literally possible. And like you were saying with the children, people will live through their children for 18 years or longer,
Mm.
depending on how many children they have. You could have four kids, and then it ends up being 30 years, not just 18, because you have a 10-year gap between the four.
Mm-hmm.
For 30 years, you're living through your children, and the person you're married to, once they all leave the nest, ends up being a stranger.
Right.
And I love you talk about how they can be little grenades in a way, because if we don't control those situations, if we don't control the grenades, if we take the pins out and let them be on their own and run our lives, that's a recipe for disaster. Like I tell my wife and my children, like I tell my boys, I have two boys, I love your mother more than I love you guys.
Mm.
We are doing this for us. This is mom and dad time. And
Mm.
like they know, we make it a point to fucking schedule little mini dates multiple times during the week in the mornings when the boys are asleep.
Mm.
So we're not it's not interrupting any family dynamic. And then we'll schedule big dates every month, and I have a giant calendar. There's stickies on when the big dates are, and then we every Sunday we put in our phone and we go through like the week and calendar out when she's going to the gym, when I'm going to the gym, when we do our micro dates. Like, so we are constantly working on the marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you go back, like I said, 6 years ago for us, I was that dude who was like, "This is coming out of nowhere.
Mm,
I'm trying to build this big business for
right.
us. Look at," and I was getting defensive.
Sure.
People are like, if someone asks, like, "Well, what is your background? Like, how do you get to coach men?" It's like, well, I went through everything that everyone's going through, but I actually realized what I was doing,
Mm,
and I had to go through and make the changes and be humble enough to realize, like, well, this is on me. I don't have the right to be defensive
mm,
because I've been legitimately neglecting my wife.
yeah.
Regardless of what I'm building, it's useless if you build a however many $1 million company and your wife fucking doesn't like you because
Yeah.
you've ignored her the whole entire time. And I'm going hunting. I'm
Yeah.
going this. And then when I'm home, I just want to play with my son. Just
Hmm.
want to play with my son. And she's just like the maid or the nanny is
Yeah.
how like they are looking at it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. I went through that.
Yeah. That makes good sense. And like that kind of leads to kind of like number two, which is like the emotional connection, like
Hmm.
emotional safety, emotional connection, or in a little bit taking her for granted. And that, like, relationships, generally speaking, is what I'm noticing is like we as humans are, well, we have been evolving since, the dawn of time.
Hmm.
And just the idea of relationships, like, if you think back even just like a couple of 100 years, like relationships were more like survival based, I would argue, than let's just say being connected because like two people want to like evolve and grow and nurture and like um you know I guess just grow, right? Emotionally, spiritually, physically, all the things. It was like, oh, like I find you attractive, you've got a good job, it's like you can keep me safe and secure. Like, hey, let's do this for life. Like you're cool. Okay, great. And like, I think you see that a lot, just like the divorce rates and like the idea, like you see a lot like, hey, people will stay together until their kids leave and then all of a sudden
Hmm.
get divorced. And I think now more than ever, like men and women both, I think are looking for more than just like a partner that's going to just provide for them. It's like, and like a lot of times, like I'll see and hear, like, hey, like I make money and like there's a roof over our heads, and like, isn't that enough? And it's like, that's great. And like, she, and by the way, you probably want to feel connected and like not just physically connected, but to be able to connect on like I call it a deeper level and be able to have like emotional conversations in a way where it's like, it's not just we're having this emotional conversation so that we can fix the issue,
Hmm.
but it's like actually being able to like be there to support her. And like a lot of times we find ourselves in a situation where it's like, for whatever reason, let's say physical connection starts to fade and we end up kind of like being in this roommate type situation. And she's like, well, I want emotional connection. And then the man's like, well, I want a physical connection. And then it starts to be this like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg type
Hmm.
situation, which in a lot of ways, like part of being in a long-term relationship and the idea of like you said, coming into um like building the relationship consciously, where it's like, yeah, every Sunday we meet and we talk about this and we plan this. It's like that stuff just isn't as necessarily earlier on for all the reasons we already talked about, because things just aren't as complicated, right? But then we do things like move in together and, you know, get married and then get a mortgage together and
Hmm.
then have a pet, right? And then kids and then all these things. And a lot of times we do it, and this is a lot of the work that I do, before we really truly know what's really going on for ourselves. What do we need? What do we want? What do we like? Et cetera, et cetera. Right. So we're a lot of times signing up for things and saying yes to things that we don't even really know that we're doing, right? And like the joke that I use is like, you ever update your iPhone and they're like software update, and basically in order to use the phone you have to agree to all the terms and conditions.
Yeah.
Have you ever gone and read any of those?
Oh, it is uh, absolutely terrible. I remember on the first iPhones, you never had to update,
Yeah,
and then now it's like you said, you can't use it, and then it wants access to everything. It's
exactly.
letting you know. It's just recording all your conversations.
Right.
Uh, yeah,
So what
selling your
do?
data.
You
You just have
fucking
to say yeah
you hit the
to fucking you.
checkbox. You're like, fuck it,
Exactly.
let's go.
I need my
Right?
phone to work.
Yeah. So like,
Yes.
and there's a really good reason why basically all humanity does this, and it's all biological, and it's called emotional symbiosis. And what happens is like we get into a relationship with somebody and I don't know how like nerdy or deep you want me to get on this, but essentially we marry typically into our unfinished business and vice versa, right? And we have aspects of our personality that basically turn off or collapse or like we shove down into the basement of our like psyche. And you can call it the honeymoon phase. Or if you've ever like, when you date somebody, like a lot of times you and them both are on your best behavior,
Yeah.
right? And then all of a sudden, like six
Our
months,
faults are not coming out.
yeah. And guess what?
Yeah.
Even if they do a little bit, like, what do? You're like, that's not that big of a deal, right? That's not a deal breaker.
Yeah, because it's new and exciting.
Yeah. And like, it's almost like every red flag potentially that comes up, depending on what it is just like you just zoom by it in a way where it's just like, that's red flag. Don't go. Not the right person.
Hmm.
And you just go by that, right? And eventually, right, you can wake up in the relationship after signing the contracts, checking the box, agreeing to the terms and conditions, right? And you're 5 year into a marriage, 10 years into a marriage, 15 years into a marriage, and you've got the mortgage, you've got the dog and the cat, the kids, right? Cars, etc. And then all of a sudden, you're like, "What? Who's this person that I'm married to?" The person that used to do no wrong is like
Hmm.
the bane of my existence, right? And it's like, I don't know if this is working. And that is the point of every relationship. That is actually like a key turning point, and it's actually very healthy and normal and not a bad thing for somebody to say that. And why that is because like they're activating certain aspects and parts of themselves that were essentially turned off, not necessarily because it's the other person's fault, but because that is like what they learned for themselves. Because here's the thing, when somebody says that, it could come as a surprise to the other person. But on the other hand, that other person also probably has some stuff in there too that he or she has not expressed or brought to the relationship. And what it does is it opens the door to things like Jesse, you've talked about with like, okay, shit's not working right now the way that it's going. What can we do to change or fix
Hmm.
or improve or progress that? Or it's like, this isn't working and I'm out. And guess what? Here's the thing that most people don't realize is because like a lot of times it's like, oh, it's that person's fault. And this is why I can't stay in this relationship. You ever seen somebody get out of a relationship and then like just end up in another relationship with the same person but a different body?
And it's often quick.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
often very quick. And guess what?
Yep.
You get you will end up in the exact same spot in the next relationship.
Hmm.
And guess what? The process of emotional symbiosis starts all over again. It's like you're going to have another 6 to 18 months of that ooey gooiness until you end up in the same spot with the same problems. Because what happens internally for you is the same process happens as you collapse to maintain that relationship at to a degree all costs and them
Yeah.
the same, and you find the same thing attractive in them that you did the last person a lot of times, unless
And
you be
you're
sorry, go ahead.
and they're ignoring the same red flags.
That's right. That's right. Because like what happens is, when you start to like lean into and understand the nervous system, is like we choose into what's familiar, not necessarily
Mhm.
what's good for us, because familiar is safe. But if what you are used to as being familiar is maybe a toxic thing, then what is toxic might be safe. And what is like a safe, healthy, secure relationship might be terrifying, or that might be boring, right? And it's not that it's boring, it's that it's safe and secure. And
So, so with what you're saying, does this translate into something that I believe that like women will seek out a man who resembles her father because like the father's
mm,
demonstrating to his daughters what they want to marry, and vice versa. The son, it's like how he's going to act in the relationship to the father.
for
Like,
sure.
okay,
100%. Like your nervous system, if you look into attachment science and attachment theory, basically what it says is like your working model of the world is developed between the ages of 0 and 7. And really, you could say and make an argument that 0 and 3 are the most impactful times, right? And
mm-hmm,
then you at that point in your system is forming basically, you can say like your mainframe is like wiring like what is okay and what is not okay, what is safe and what is a threat. And you get that information directly from your main caregivers, which most of the time are mom and dad. So, how
mm-hmm,
your mom and dad respond to you, how they show love, how they give love, how they respond to certain emotions, how they show you how to navigate and regulate certain emotions, what's okay behaviorally, what's not okay, how to let somebody know that something is not okay. Do you put up with something? Do you not put up with something? How do you voice to the other person that, like, something's bothering you, etc., etc.? The list can go on forever. 100% absolutely. You um you look for that in a partner, right? Because think about this, Jesse. Like if you're used to like love and peace and like people like treating you kindly and like relentless support and like somebody being there for you, somebody like let's say a father figure just like always doing what he says he's going to do when he
mm-hmm,
says he's going to do it. And that is what you expect, and that's like kind of the standard and the norm. Well, like think if a daughter gets into a relationship with a man, that's going to be like her expectation, right? And
yeah,
when that doesn't get met, it's going to be like, hey, like I asked you for this and you said this and you didn't do it, right? And if he doesn't take ownership, like she saw her dad do, and say, yeah, you know what, you are right, and I did say that and I'm really sorry, right? And follow that up with change behavior, it's like there we go. But if he's not reliable, if he doesn't do what he say he's going to do, if he doesn't, like, if he's not in his purpose, if he's not like taking care of himself by pursuing that purpose and following his passions and making time for you on the in the same amount, with the same amount of energy, then she's going to be like, this doesn't feel safe,
mm-hmm,
right? This doesn't
yeah,
feel familiar to me. And absolutely, to answer your question in a long-winded way, yes.
yeah. All right, yeah, that was a. I completely agree. It was almost rhetorical, but I wanted your validation in something that I talk about. It's like we are literally programming our children, and I feel like majority of America doesn't look at their children in that way.
Right.
It's like we just feed them, love them, give them
Right.
hugs. We don't want them. And then there's the point of we when they're not cute anymore, we don't want them to be annoying. We don't want
Mm,
them to be this. We don't think our actions in the relationship are going to impact them long term,
yeah.
but we do. So I would like to go into how can somebody reprogram themselves from maybe things that aren't very healthy to take into the relationship, because people bring baggage into
Mm-hmm.
relationships, whether it's baggage from how they were raised
Mm-hmm.
or baggage from their previous relationship.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think people are very humble, very accountable. They don't look in the mirror very well to say that I'm the problem.
Mm.
So the person who does, I guess, is willing to change, take that step, like how would you suggest they reprogram themselves or start to so that they can be that person who's a healthy human being who's whole.
Yeah.
Because I tell people you have to be whole as an individual before you get into a relationship. Otherwise,
Mm.
you're going to end up in failure. So, like, how can we reprogram ourselves?
That's a good question, Jesse. And I would say it's pretty tough to do it on your own, first and
Mm-hmm.
foremost. So for all my lone wolves out there, it's like I hate to break it to you, but like this is not a process that is like a solo mission, if you will. So
I agree. I
so,
agree.
and like that's probably why you and I both got into coaching is because like we've at some point found somebody who's helped us that has
Mm-hmm.
been down the road to help take us a little further down the road. And you're right, it's very difficult to eat the humble pie, to look in the mirror. And a lot of times like what it takes is pain, right? People, a lot of times will do a lot of things to get pleasure, but for the most part, we do more to avoid pain.
Mm-hmm.
So most men aren't ready to step into this type of journey until like there's either like high stakes, right, to where they're about to lose something or they've lost something and they've had a lot of pain. And if you're in that position, or let's just say you are ready to do this work and you can like recognize like preemptively factors that are starting to present itself, it's like you need to get a mentor that has been down this road and knows how to lead you further in the direction that you're going, right? Because the path's well lit. Everybody's road and journey looks different, but the destination is the same. It's like we want to heal, we want to become more whole so that we can be more whole in our relationship and like find a mentor that's going to be a clean mirror to reflect back the parts of you that like it's hard for you to look at and it's painful for you to look at because you're right, like we all have baggage, and like what's the saying, it's like unpack your baggage so your kids don't have to carry it, basically. And it's so interesting and like it's crazy to think about at this point in my journey, to think at one point, because I was right there with most of America too in a lot of ways, where it's like, oh yeah, they're just kids. It's like, when they're young, they're not going to remember anyways, right? How many times have you heard somebody say that shit?
Too
And it's
many.
so crazy because this, like, literally, because I have a 20-month-old. He's about to be,
Mm-hmm.
actually, no, he's 22 months. Jeez, he's gonna be 2 in December, and he's a sponge, like,
Yeah.
and they just absorb through like what you say, of course, but what you do, how you respond, how you react. So, like, to me, the foundational piece is like nervous system regulation and understanding like why you are the way that you are and why you act the way that you act. And like, if you're a dad or a father or a husband, a lot of times, like, where you can start is like what irritates you about your kids or your wife, right? Because like a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times, like underneath, there's something underneath that, right? If you can't stand something in your kid, it's probably something that you couldn't stand in you, which guess what was probably something that your parents couldn't stand in you.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like breadcrumbs there in anybody's life that that's kind of like a point where you can start, and oftentimes that starts in like, hey, the relationship between you and your wife. And of course it usually gets magnified when you have these little grenades being thrown into your life,
Mm-hmm.
like kids, basically, because it pressure tests your system. And if you don't have a system at all, well, guess what, it's like eventually that's just going to lead to the erosion of your relationship. And that's not what we want, because we want healthy relationships. We want to feel good so that we can
Yeah.
have healthy relationships, so we can be good examples for, the eyes that are watching us.
Yes. We statistically, our children are going to have the exact same marriage that we have.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think it's something, like you said, it's often overlooked. They're not going to remember this.
Hmm.
I'm very fortunate with my two boys that it was when my oldest was one, when I started to have this realization that I am going to have to change myself as a man, because my wife was with a giant man child.
Mm.
I was 20 something and could be 14 all at the same time. And it did take a looking in the mirror of, okay, how can I completely change or think about like the men who have the relationships, the quality of life? Where can I go in and search and read?
Mm.
And there are times where I would be like, let's say watching a video, let's say watching one of yours, and you're just throwing out fucking fire. And there can be times, like you said, we will look at that what you're saying, not like it because
Mm.
it's something that we lack.
Mm.
And it's like, oh, and then I had to fucking bite the bullet and be like, that's fucking me.
Mm.
And it sucks.
Yeah.
But it's the only way to change is to eat that humble pie and be like, yeah, what this guy's saying I do.
Right.
Yep. Or what this book is talking about, I gotta change. Because we will want to get defensive. We'll want to I say that people often deflect.
Mm-hmm.
It's different. Yeah, I was raised different. This doesn't apply to me, or my upbringing. You don't know what trauma I had when I was
Sure.
7.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, we're all a product of the choices we made, not that we continue to make
Yeah.
as adults. Like we can choose to change.
For sure. Yeah, I totally agree. And like what I notice with especially this space and like a lot of coaches out there, not to like knock the masculine space, but it's like not I truly believe getting into this work isn't like I feel like there's a lot of shame out there, like with taking responsibility, and if you're not, like you're not a man, all this stuff. Because a
Hmm.
lot of times like the things that we carry that happen to us, like we're real and it is difficult to navigate. And the start of this journey is like really finding somebody that can like lean in and help you understand that like hey, you aren't alone, and like hey, it's okay to be where you're at, and actually makes really good sense why you're at, and hey, let me help you unpack like why you're feeling defensive.
Hmm.
And like because like you're right, we all have different experiences in our childhood that people, you can call it trauma. Really, like when you understand biology and like neuroscience, like you don't have a fully formed prefrontal cortex until you're 25. And if
Yeah.
you listener don't know what that is, it's basically the smart part of your brain that's responsible for all your executive functioning, like emotional regulation, impulse control, your ability to delay gratification, make hard decisions, make hard decisions in the moment, etc. And if you have experiences like that are difficult, that could be like as simple as like having certain feelings and nobody to attune to you, right? Witnessing rupture and repair, not having financial resources, moving around a lot. If you had parents that got divorced, if you had parents that fought a lot, but then you didn't get to see what repair looked like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, well, then you could be organized internally in a way that sets you up in your adult life that is going to leave you handicapped in some way. Like you could be walking around with a broken ankle, looking at everybody running and
Hmm.
like hating the world, like thinking like, oh, see, you don't understand. Like, and but not realize that you have a broken ankle and you try and you can't run, and then you try and you can't run, you try and you can't run, you think like what's wrong with me, and then like you develop this mindset of, some people call it victim mentality, right?
Hmm.
Or I mean, you could label it a lot of different ways, when really it's like, hey man, like yeah, you're trying to do CrossFit right now and you've got a busted ankle. Let's take a beat, let's like put some attention on your ankle and understand why like that's there. And then all of a sudden like your ankle heals, and then you can get back and like do all the things that everybody like that you want to do, like get into CrossFit or the running, like I know that's a metaphor and an analogy, or
Yeah.
start
Yeah.
the business, right? Or lean in harder in your relationships, etc.
Hmm. Yeah. And so a short version is can trauma can be defined of anything we don't understand, and therefore we can mitigate that trauma once there's the repair.
Yeah, it's
and
like
understanding the why of something or the how of something.
right. It's like trauma on like let's say an emotional trauma, let's just say, as opposed to like people think of trauma as like we'll call it big T trauma, where it's like, you know, physical assault or like
Hmm.
sexual assault or like real verbal abuse, like something that you'd see in a headline,
Yeah.
right? But like little T trauma, we'll say, and they both like have the same felt sense of like not good in your system. Could just be something like neglect.
Hmm.
Like you really wanted to do this sport, right? But your parents are like, no, that's stupid.
Yeah.
And then they never gave you the chance to do that thing that you really wanted to do, right? And we're not making your parents bad. Like they're doing the best that they could. But that in and of itself can impact you your entire life.
Hmm.
Crazy. Because like you don't have the hardware to properly process that at the time. Like you're a teenager, let's say you have 50% of your prefrontal. And like why like I believe in this work so heavily is it's like such a huge mindset shift, like for kids, let's just say. Because like I was just talking to a client the other day who's got like a 7-year old, right? And is like he knows what to do, he just doesn't want to do it,
Hmm.
right? Let's just say like getting ready in the morning. I'm like, yes and no, because he's got like, let's say 20-25% of his prefrontal cortex, which is his executive functioning, right? So it's not that he doesn't know what to do. It's like he's got very little impulse control, period. So if you've got 25% of prefrontal, let's just say as a 7-year old, 2.5 out of 10 times he's going to get it right and he's going to do the thing that you want when you want it in the way that you want it done. And the
Hmm.
rest of the time he's not just trying to be manipulative, right? He's actually just being adaptive based on the capacity that he has to be able to do anything, really.
Yeah. I don't know if you've heard this example. I'm stealing this from Jordan Peterson.
Hmm.
The most layman terms understanding of prefrontal cortex versus not is you have a person playing a video game
Hmm.
and he does pretty good. You have person B in the same video game kills everybody much quicker. The only difference is the video game player who killed everybody and much quicker, he couldn't determine the enemy and the people on his side.
Hmm.
So he's just going.
Yeah.
Can't distinguish the difference between the good guys and the bad guys
Mm.
though.
Got it. Okay, I see what you're saying there.
Versus the person with the fully developed prefrontal cortex didn't accomplish the mission as fast or as quick, but none of his own guys died.
Hmm.
Versus no prefrontal cortex, shoots everybody, does it quick,
Yeah. Almost
killed
like
all his own teammates though.
yeah, almost in like a more reactive state as opposed to like thought out. And
Exactly.
yeah, I mean that makes such good sense, Jesse, because like when we don't have prefrontal online, a lot of times it's because we're our nervous system state is actually changed. I love Jordan Peterson, and I just wish he would just update his neuroscience understanding of polyvagal theory and the way the nervous system works, because when we're outside of a, let's say, a ventral, you've got three nervous system states, and you can think of it in a simple way as like an upside down stoplight of green, yellow, and red. Green, good, right? Ventral, it's when we're in a state of we feel safe, connected, love, joy, our prefrontal's on. As soon as our system detects threat, or we don't, or feels like we don't have the resources or support to be able to handle the thing that we need to do in front of us, that overwhelms us in a way and starts to change our state to what I call a yellow state or a sympathetic state, which is more of that traditional fight or flight. And what
Hmm.
happens when we start getting into that fight or flight state is just like what you described. We're like, we just need to do. And and like it's less thinking, it's more reactive. And the reason that is because our prefrontal shuts off and we start going backwards in our brain into our limbic system, if you will, and we're in this reactive state, right? And the reason we have evolved to have that is because like let's just say for example, like I'm not sure where you live, but if a dangerous animal kind of like jumped out in front of you or a snake was there, we don't have to like look at that thing, or somebody comes at you with a knife,
Hmm.
hopefully that never happens. You don't have to be like, oh man, there's a bear, there's a mountain lion, there's a rattlesnake. Oh yeah, that's bad. And I should increase my BPMs. I should start tensing. My heart rate should go up, and my breathing should get more shallow because I need to prepare my body to either fight this thing or run away from this thing. Right? We don't do that. It
Hmm.
just
Yeah.
instantly happens. It also instantly happens outside of our conscious awareness. Right? It happens without us even thinking about it. It's a program that's running in the back of our mind, basically. And so when we get into that state unconsciously, and our prefrontal shuts off, and we're more reactive, well, what that might look like if you're in a relationship or with your kids is you start going from 0 to 100, or maybe you say things in the moment that you don't mean that might be hurtful to the people that you like really care about. And then all of a sudden 30, 60, 120 minutes later, you look back and you're like, fuck, why did I say that again?
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
do that? I shouldn't have done that, like, or said that to my kids. And then there's one more state, and that's red, which is dorsal, which is immobilization, shutdown, which is just like, it's too much. I'm going to get overwhelmed. I'm going to shut down, in an argument that could look like walking away, or, you get really defensive and you just like don't want to say anything and you stonewall, right? Like our system gets overwhelmed. And even like after that, we could see our wife crying, our kids crying, and we come back online and we look back and we're just like, man, why did I do that? Right. And it has nothing to do with who you are or your mindset or anything like that. It's just a dysregulation of your nervous system, and it is perceiving a threat, which not necessarily physical. But if you track it back to the things like we talked about that happened in your childhood, where it's like, hey, you have no lived experiences of conflict being good, right? It's only
Hmm.
ended bad. And guess what? When it ends bad, you're stuck by yourself and you're stuck forever and you're with these shitty emotions. And it's like you're the problem. And that's all the stuff that you kind of carry when you're younger. And this kind of like ties in perfectly to number three, which is like the whole happy wife, happy life, avoid conflict. Right. And like we think like, oh, let's just say yes. Right. And let's
Hmm.
like, oh, let's avoid conflict. Let's keep everything even keel because conflict, not good. And um, not only is that reinforced with society, but like a lot of times it's a lived experience because not very many people have the example of like how to navigate healthy conflict, and that, hey, conflict is okay. And that like it's just two people with differing opinions. And instead of it being like, I'm right, you're wrong, like the biggest switch that I try to encourage people, especially in relationships, is like, conflict should be, the win is, can I understand why you feel the way that you feel? And vice versa. And be able to like really hold that as a truth for them, as opposed to like, you're wrong, I'm right, and here's why. And
Yeah.
here's why you shouldn't feel that way. And if you don't hear it the first time, maybe I'll just say it again in a louder tone or try to explain it a different way.
So can we loop yellow when our partner's going into the fight or flight
Yeah.
to really what we were talking about earlier of how oftentimes a man will be a provider, come home and think that that's just enough,
Right.
and
Yeah.
I usually will tell men, okay, you're a provider, it's only one wall of a four-walled house,
Mm.
like it's one
Yeah.
item. And if you're doing the happy wife happy life, eventually she's still going to hit yellow with that fight or flight,
Mm-hmm.
because as much as every woman says like I want to be able to make all the decisions,
Mm-hmm.
they really biologically don't want to have to make all the decisions. They want a man who is comfortable to be decisive on something. Otherwise, it is that survival state will eventually kick in if we're only providing paychecks and we're saying the yes because there's just an incomplete, you could say, an incomplete role between the man and the wife in those situations. There's a lack of leadership, we'll say, if he's only providing paychecks. Like, how else is he maybe leading the household, influencing the children, not putting it all on her? The whole yes thing, him actually making decisions for the benefit of the children, of the house
Mm-hmm.
and the marriage, versus just allowing her, putting it all on her, like, yes, 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 whatever you want, whatever you want.
Yeah.
They're not going to feel that kind of safety and security because it's like she's coming to you with something, not for you to just put it back on her,
Right.
essentially, by just always giving in. I don't even say give in, but it's essentially what he's doing by just always happy wife, happy life. Yes, she's going to want you to take control of situations for the betterment, and her be like, okay, I can trust him. I feel good with him making these decisions versus if we're just being, if the she's just been programmed her whole thing to her make those decisions. No, a woman doesn't want an undecisive man
Sure.
or an
Yeah.
indecisive man.
Yeah, I don't, and like vice versa too. It's like just being able to, I think at the root of that is just like, hey, I want to be able to like throw something at you and then
Mm-hmm.
let's pitch and catch.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
also, like, I don't want you to, like, the thing that I throw at you, I don't necessarily need you to fix it, right? If
Mm-hmm.
it's, and I think a lot of times what happens, because you said a lot there, Jesse, and like, let
Yeah.
try to unpack the first thing
Mm-hmm.
that you said was basically like tying the sympathetic back to like when she brings you something, right? And then you kind of talked about like saying yes when you don't mean to say yes, or just agreeing. Um, and let's just talk about just like perceived conflict, or like when your wife brings you something difficult, let's just say. A lot of times, like conflict happens because when we think about the stoplight, let's just say our partner is in yellow, right? And they're in sympathetic. Now, when we really like take this in and we understand that, like, whether that be your partner as a husband or a wife, this can happen both ways. And she's in yellow, let's just say, as an example. What we need to be really conscious of is what's our state. Because a lot of times, especially if there's been patterns and cycles going on and on and on and on, if she brings something up, it's like, I mean, I'm sure you know it, where it's like she's got the tone, she's got the look, right? And it's the topic that she's bringing up again. All of a sudden, instantly, you're already like playing out how this thing's going to go,
Mm-hmm.
right? Without actually leaning in and listening and understanding what is really going on, right? And you're already thinking of ways to rationally fix or solve this thing. And a lot of times, like, this is kind of like my own anecdotal observations, is like whenever a partner brings you a problem, it has what I'll call an affective tone. And what that means is like there's an underlying emotion to the thing. And that could be sadness, that could be frustration, that could be anger, distress, right? And you can almost like feel the way, like feel what that is by the way she's sharing it. And this will activate you depending on your ability to regulate your own emotions. And if you can't notice that, and if you can't hang in green in her yellow or her red, then you are going to drop down the ladder or down the stoplight and join her. And guess what happens then?
Not
Fucking
good.
your prefrontal goes off
Yeah.
and you go into your reactive mode. And for most men, that reactivity, that reactive mode is logic and reason. And like, let's fix this problem. And it's where men live. And I'm making gross generalizations here, by the way, in their businesses and their lives. Because, like, we are master, well, a lot of us are master problem solvers. Like, a lot of times, like at work, we're the fucking man because we get in and we're cool, calm, collected under pressure and we like solve
Mm-hmm.
all these problems and like we're revered in our workplace, let's say, or at least we like to think so. And then we get home and then all of a sudden we're like a bench player and not the star player because it's like the same thing that works at work is like not work here,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And what I believe is really happening is like we get that emotion comes up in us and it's uncomfortable in some circumstances, depending on your capacity to be able to sit and hang in that tension. And if you can start to be able to hang in that tension and realize, like, oh shit, when she's like sad or upset, I try to fix her because like I'm really uncomfortable. And guess what happens when you fix the thing, or at least you perceivingly fix it, and she feels better, or at least she says she feels better? Like, guess what? You feel better. And it's like, oh yeah, I solved that problem. And now I don't feel bad because she doesn't feel bad. And the real fix is being able to be flexible in your nervous system to be able to be like, hey, I can go to yellow and go to red and know that like I can stay with a little bit of green here so that I can have some empathy, so I can understand her, so I can like hear and listen to what she's saying, as opposed to being like, well, this chick's crazy and she doesn't know what she's talking about. And here's why. And let me try to convince her that that's why she feels that way and that she doesn't really need to feel that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A woman does not want to be told that she doesn't need to feel a certain way.
No,
Just
no.
telling everyone out there.
Yeah, I
In
haven't
my,
met one yet that does.
yeah. I've done that a million times too.
Yeah,
Early in our relationship for years.
right.
It's like, oh, you don't need to feel that way. Why do you care? Who
Yeah,
cares? Those people suck.
yeah.
Everything, because my personality is I don't care what anyone else thinks, because
Mm,
99.9% of the time I'm not going to do anything to, I guess, ruin my name or make my family look bad, because I'm not out there being a criminal.
mm-hmm,
But it's like, I'm not worried if someone didn't like your dinner or
mm-hmm,
didn't like the party you threw or just little things.
mm,
But as far as, um, yeah, in our household, we have something very clear where she just will tell me, like, I want you to fix this or I want you to listen.
yeah, that's
And
great.
sometimes there'll be times where she'll want me to fix it. And I still am like, I think she really just wants me to listen.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to wait to fix it as long as
Yeah,
possible, because I've learned maybe she thinks she wants but the amount of talking she's doing, she really just wants me to listen.
yeah,
And then there'll be times she's like, I need you to fix this. Who can you call to get this
right.
done? Because so and so messed this up,
Mm-hmm.
and someone in this area. Like,
Yeah,
and I'm like, fucking, I got you.
yeah.
And I can give you a real example this weekend of what you were talking about, of energy, of in regards to a argument with your spouse and getting from green to yellow, you bringing yourself down.
Mm,
So my father-in-law passed away like 3 weeks ago.
sorry
So
for your loss, man.
my wife has been kind of put in charge. She has three other siblings, her
Yeah.
mom, of doing the celebration of life, getting
Mm,
affairs in order. And on Friday, she was like, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And I was like, I got a full plate."
mm-hmm,
And I could tell she wanted my help.
mm-hmm,
What she didn't know is I already had four buddies who were committed to going and helping and getting all the stuff done she wanted.
mm-hmm.
And I was like, if I tell her, I want to surprise her that, hey, we're going to just knock this thing out of the park
Mm-hmm.
for you. And I was like, but I want it to be a surprise. And if I don't tell her and I act like I can't,
Mm.
she's going to be fucking pissed.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to have to tell her, "Hey, you should know everything I do is for the benefit of the family." And
Mm.
I'm manifesting this. And
Mm-hmm.
I see her talking to me and she's just getting more irritated. And, well, I just need your help. And it was like literally, and it's like I could have gone from green to yellow,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because it's like my energy of me thinking all this negativity and her already, the state that she's already in, it
Mm-hmm.
could have escalated. We could have both been in red and
Yeah.
nothing got done. So I just like literally had to go to her, kind of grab her, and was like, I apologize. I literally manifested this whole 5 minute interaction that just happened, and this is on me. And she was like, What do you mean? I was like, I literally was like, she's going to be irritated that I'm not committing to doing her thing, and that I'm telling her I got more important things to do for the long run of the family,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to be mad. And she was like, you, and I was like, yeah. And it's like exactly where we went. And I just realized it's going to snowball. So I
Yeah.
just had to come say sorry. Like, I'm going to help you.
Yeah.
I'm everything you're worried about. I promise it will get taken care of. I just, before you want it done, I just can't tell you when I can get to it.
Yeah.
And she was like, okay. And then, of course, me and a handful of buddies went, knocked it out of the park. She was like so pumped and excited.
So
But
cool.
the fact that, like you were saying, like we can be putting out this energy, overthinking something, and then us be going from green to yellow, red, and just being aware of those things. Okay, she's already in yellow. Her energy, that her tone,
Mm-hmm.
I could have easily just been like gotten irritated
Yeah.
easily and just
Yeah.
gone to yellow really quick.
For sure.
And then she's already about to go to red. I could have just joined her.
Mm-hmm.
10 years ago, it's exactly how it would have gone down.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That's awesome, dude. And it's like the more that you have, it's like getting curious, basically. It's like the way the mantra is like get curious before you get furious. If you can build that in, because that's a hard thing to do. And like it's from Dr. Bruce Perry. He talks about regulate, relate, then reason.
mhm.
Because most people want to just get, not most people, but like a lot of guys want to get into just like reasoning and logic right away. And like it's not just because she's in yellow and you're in green, it's usually because you're both in yellow, right? And what we want to do is, like you said previously, like you're like, yeah, like we have this thing where she's like, I want you to listen or fix. And I would almost say, usually it's 99.9% of the time, it's always listen first. And then it's
Yeah.
like, maybe I want you to fix it after, or maybe I don't, right? And like, the biggest thing that I'll say about that is don't even expect sometimes that you get into reasoning in the same conversation, depending on the topic. And this is like so huge that like a lot of guys I think miss, myself included, is like you can have separate, completely separate conversations from understanding, active listening, validating, and like having her like experience be real for her, regardless of what you agree or not. Like what you want to do is be able to drop in and have it make sense for her, right? And because guess what? Her prefrontal's not there. So it might not make rational sense to you, right? So if you can
That,
drop in and just like be like, oh wow, yeah, if this and this happened and they said that or they did this there, then it makes sense to me why you would feel this way. Wow, thanks for sharing that. Did I get everything? Did I miss anything? Is there anything else you want to share? Yeah, this, and this. And she's like, well, she didn't share that before, but it's like drawing her out. And then it's like, wow, just like, thanks for sharing that. And
yeah,
then,
I've told many men that oftentimes she doesn't mean what she literally says. We're going to have to be doing some digging, meet them where they're at, because men and women, we are just different. And you're going to just have to be patient. I know my wife, I'm not speaking for everyone, but my wife will say 1,000 words. And if I took all that literally, it's like, well, that's not the conclusion that I come to a conclusion, put it in fucking chat GPT
mm,
and it summarizes it. She's going to say that is wrong. And I have to be aware of that.
yeah, yeah. And like, but that's okay too. Is like, hey, that's wrong. Oh,
Totally.
okay, yeah. Well, I want to make sure. And then, because they're like, oh yeah, then she never says that. I hear her right or whatever. And it's like, good. Then ask her again. Oh, okay. Like, I'd love to hear more because I want to make sure I get this right. It's like every time like they poke, it's like you can just turn that right back and turn it into like more of a connection. And the more you do it, the more they trust it. And eventually you get what you want, which is like to reason, right? And when they can feel like that emotional safety or that emotional connection with like, hey, I can just like be myself and I don't have to like tiptoe around like how or when or like what I say in a lot of ways. Obviously there's boundaries to that too that eventually get put into place on the man side and the woman side. But then all of a sudden there's like this connection that develops because it's like I can just let down my guard and like I can bring this to him. He's not going to solve me. He's going to listen and it makes sense to him. And then all of a sudden like I feel like I make sense to me and I trust myself. And then guess what happens? They get right into being able to reason and be logical. And then it's like, yeah, like can we think about this together or can we solve this together? And then that's when you can just flip that switch back on and be like, solve a problem. You've come to the right man.
Yeah. Yeah. They're in talking with my wife, trying to discover often what maybe a root issue is. I've in the past been, okay, I understand where you are, what you are speaking about in regards to this topic. I agree. I'm on board, but I feel like there's something deeper and this isn't the true issue.
Hmm.
And there are times where she's like, I think this stems from, and then it's like, okay, now we're getting to what actually is the underlying
Yeah.
cause of why you're mad right now,
Yeah.
because this is almost like kind of a gimmick. That might not even be the right word. It's not the fundamental reason why you're angry. This is just the
The
thing that
branches
got
to the
the
tree.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
just one of the a branch to the tree.
Yeah.
And I guess being willing to go through that process, I know has helped us.
For
Like,
sure.
okay, this isn't the stick that broke the camel's back. Like
Yeah.
it's like what's the real thing that's going on right now, and just giving her the space where she feels safe and secure again to tell me, okay, the real thing, this is just what put me over the top, is this.
Yeah.
And it's
Well,
like, okay, now let's talk about that.
yeah. And then that is usually leads to something else too. Cause like we started talking about all this, like everything happens when our nervous system starts to form in childhood in a lot of ways. And when we like basically our nervous system's there to keep us safe, not necessarily physical, but emotionally, relationally, etc. So like if we learn something is not safe, then if we see that in our environment or hear that or feel that, we're going to have a natural trigger that's going to send us from green to yellow. So we have all that stuff underneath all the stuff that we sign up for in our partner, and guess what? They have their own stuff, right? So like that makes perfect sense, Jesse. Like when you're like, yeah, that's the branches. And then like the other thing might just be the trunk. And then there's probably something under that that's the root that goes all the way
Mm-hmm.
back to like, oh yeah, I'm sensitive to this because of this. And that's reinforced by this that was really underneath me like being mad that you didn't take the trash out.
It's so true, but it's like us being humble enough, being willing to go through the fire, have those tough conversations, because people don't want to have tough conversations.
Mm,
We mentioned that earlier. Like it's just
that's right.
like, oh, no need for that.
Yeah.
But the triggers, because if we look at how an upbringing, and it's like, well, I didn't like how my parents did this, or I didn't like how my mom and dad interacted around this, and then subconsciously it will trigger you
Yeah.
later on in life.
Yep.
And one of the beautiful things about my relationship with my wife is how much we've both grown and
Mm,
been aware and open about a trigger, things we don't want in our marriage that maybe was in our parents' marriage.
mm-hmm.
And I would say my wife has a lot of them.
Yeah.
My wife used to joke that if it wasn't for me and Disney, because she was a Disney princess, she was Cinderella at Disneyland.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the
Fun.
peasant married the princess. Uh, she jokes that she probably would have been a stripper because
Yeah.
she had crazy daddy issues.
Yeah.
Like her parents did not talk about like real things, serious
Mm,
things. Like you didn't have serious conversations.
mm-hmm.
So there are, like you said, if there's something that triggers your spouse and they don't feel safe,
Yeah.
you're going to have to figure out what that is so you guys are both even aware of it.
Yeah. And like something that you said, which was like, yeah, why would you want to have hard conversations? Right. And like number three of the like losing a woman is like saying yes, right? When you mean to say no, or like basically avoiding conflict. And
Mm-hmm.
it makes sense if you've gone through life basically with lots of lived experiences that hard conversations like are really uncomfortable, or they always lead to yelling or physical stuff, or it's really uncomfortable and then the next day everything's fine, right? And there's no proof that like having a hard conversation is beneficial, then guess what? You're probably going to want to avoid it, right? And it's just like this. Like you can think of it as like, yeah, most of us try to avoid hard workouts, but like we know it's good, right? With enough proof for ourselves that hard workouts are good. Oh, wow, we feel better. Oh, we look better. And then we feel better again. Same thing can happen, let's just call it emotional fitness, when we're able to, like slowly over time with another person, prove to ourselves and our nervous systems that, like, oh, wow, I have all this resistance to this thing that I want to say and understand why that's there. And it's like, oof, maybe that's been there before her or before him, and unpack that to where we can start having more and more hard and, like you just said with your wife, like real conversations. Then all of a sudden like you really start to um move the needle and redirect the trajectory of like where your relationship is headed, because like then all of a sudden it's like all those things that you're feeling like you understand for yourself, but you're able to share it, and then you have joint context, and like then all of a sudden your partner really learns like real deep aspects and parts of you that maybe like you didn't really even know, and then you guys can like it stops being about what is at that branch surface level and more about like, oh, like I get why Jesse's feeling this way, it's not just because of this, it's because of this, right? And then like it helps you take things less personally, less defensiveness, right? It's easier to take
Mm-hmm.
responsibility in arguments on both sides because like there's just less resentment underlying, right? Because you're able to express more about like really what's going on for you. And the thing is like in every relationship, like this is going on. And it's like, but the example that most people put out there is like, oh, healthy relationships mean like we're always happy and we don't fight. And that is like so
That's
so
bullshit.
far, so far from the truth. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's crazy. It's just yeah.
Though
Yeah.
to me, I mean, I would I'd put my house on. Those people are miserable.
Oh
They're
my god,
no
yeah.
happier than
Yeah.
anyone else.
Mhm.
And as far as conflict goes, I would say if you're someone who wants to win at conflict, that's terrible and you guys are going to be miserable. If you're
Yeah.
someone who avoids conflict and just says yes, so they're or you're right, honey,
Mhm.
you're going to be just as miserable as the person who wants to on the other side of the pendulum who wants to win.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
in
I
different ways, but yes.
exactly. Yep, you guys are both in camp miserable
Yeah.
just with different colored hats.
Well, and like I would almost say that you eventually become the person that wants to win the argument because you end up with just so much resentment from saying yes when you mean
Mhm.
to say no. And it's like, it's really interesting. It's like you can win the argument, just change the guidelines of what it means to win. And winning is understanding the other person's perspective without agreeing with it. And like
Mhm.
you can hold both things. You can have an opinion, right? And you can be like, oh, okay, why does she feel this way? And like let me let that be true. And I can like have my reality be true too.
Yeah, with going through conflict, having the hard conversations, etc., with my wife, that has greatly improved our relationship overall. And I could have started a fight just 2 days ago, 3 days ago,
Yeah.
and it's just like that being aware.
Yeah,
And I'll tell people this, since my father-in-law died, my wife has kicked my ass a couple times because she's so frustrated with other things in her life.
for sure.
We did a date day at the lake, and she's like, I just know you're the person I can take it out on
Mm,
because you're strong enough that I can take it out on you, and I can't take it out on the people who I'm actually frustrated with.
mm,
Versus I could just be pissed that she's pissed at me.
yeah,
And it would just takes conversation for her to be like, you know what? Here's why I'm mad. Everything that's been going on with my dad and the affairs and
yeah.
whatnot. Um, and I just have to take it out on you because I can't take it out on anyone else.
Mm,
So don't take it personal.
mm,
And it's like, I got you. I'll be your punching bag until after the funeral, celebration of life, whatever
yeah,
they're calling it.
yeah,
It's like, I'm here. If you got to
yeah.
beat me up, you got to beat me up. And in her defense, in the beginning, I wasn't very empathetic that the guy passed away.
Mm,
So that did not help
yeah,
in the whole in the whole process.
yeah,
I just have a different look on life that I feel like one American who realizes we're all going to die because we
yeah,
all live like we're going to live for eternity.
for sure.
We trash our bodies. We
Yeah,
always are like, well, we'll do that in the future. We'll do
yeah,
that another time. Um, and it's like, I heard Tony Robbins say, does anyone think that, realize that there's other cultures that truly celebrate the passing of someone because they've gone on to the next step
mm,
in the process?
yeah,
And it's here in America that we get sad for selfish reasons because of what that person did for us
sure.
versus realizing that that person could be pain free.
Yeah,
They're out of their misery. Maybe they were fighting cancer and just going through struggles, maybe addiction, whatever it is.
sure.
That person is pain free wherever they believe that they are going,
Yeah,
whether it's to the soil or to the heavens.
yeah.
It's like we should, so, and like that's just stuck and ingrained in my mind since the first
Mm,
time I've heard it.
mm,
And I'm a very biblical person. And I'm like, well, this is just part of the journey for me.
yeah, sure.
So it's part of the journey for other people around me. And some people don't like that. They're like, no, we should be so sad that this person is gone. And it's just like,
Yeah,
I just look at it different. And
yeah.
in the beginning, look, my wife's always known that that's my belief of death
Mm,
because she's seen me have grandparents go, cousins
mm,
go, etc. But when it came to her experience,
mm,
she was like, I thought you were going to be different.
mm,
And it's like, okay, I have to work on me being more sympathetic of her feelings in this moment,
yeah,
even though for the last 14 years she's had a sense,
yeah,
didn't know that it would apply to even her family of my thoughts on death.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that makes sense if that's your belief that it might be more difficult to like go down to like we just call it like a red state, which would just be sadness, depression, and just like
Mm-hmm.
despair. And that's why it's powerful in those moments to be able to hold two truths, right? Like we were just talking about, where it's like, yeah, I believe this, and like I can understand and go there and be able to like reflect back to somebody that's like in that state and just be there with them to let them process and experience that and do it in a way where it's like okay and it's like normalized for them. And that's like the core of just like being able to process any, let's just say, emotional injury in a way. And like you can think of it as like the different states are like different parts of your body, right? And like everybody has different capacity to be in a different state for certain lengths of time, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. And like sometimes even being in a green state is a difficult thing to do, just because like for example, you can have bouts of like things being so good, but then used to like if something's good for too long, the shoe's gonna drop, right? So you're like hyper vigilant to like wait for that as opposed to just be able to like take it in for what it is. And then like naturally when something does happen in life, it's like you can go back to yellow and red and like get through that and go back up to green. And being able to just like sit with somebody in like a red state, like oftentimes is the quickest way to get them back up the ladder or back up the stoplight. Because like polyvagal theory and the stuff that I'm talking about, one of the most powerful things that we have as humans is called co-regulation, which basically,
Yeah.
in a nutshell, is just like two or more people that are in proximity, kind of like what you are now in a lot of ways. It's just like you send safe signals back to each other. And like outside your conscious awareness, you're like, oh, this dude's cool, this dude's cool. And it's like you get a felt sense of like free energy in your body, right? And the same could go for somebody that is like not feeling good, right? And like this is what I share with a lot of my clients is like in situations of conflict or like there's a affective tone of emotion of red or despair or sadness, as opposed to like convincing somebody like they shouldn't feel that way. It's like just meet them where they're at and be able to like be with them in red. And like naturally, like even if you don't feel like having a friend or your partner come and just like hang out with you and sit out on the couch and veg, like eventually they're going to be like, all right, let's like, I'm feeling better, right? And I think
Hmm.
like the biggest thing that I've worked on for myself is like understanding that the process of healing isn't like having a conversation one time and it's like done with either things that you've done to hurt your partner or things that have gone on in their life that they're struggling with, right? Whether that be losing somebody, a job, or like having a hard time with a friend or whatever it is, right? Or their friend doing something to them. It's like the process is like, oh shit, this comes up, right? And being able to share that and then having somebody just be like, oh man, that makes sense. Like I'm just here. And then like
Yeah.
over time, eventually it's just like less and less and less and less and less. And depending on the significance of the loss or whatever it is, like, you know, that might be with you for the rest of your life. You never know.
No, I think that's very important for people to realize.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you can anchor into in those moments of, despair, sadness, etc. To like where like beautiful ideas and beliefs that you had just shared of like, hey, and it's really comforting to know that like maybe he's not suffering anymore, or maybe he's in a better
Hmm.
place, or maybe he's on to his next phase. And it's a real powerful like thing to also help facilitate like after those emotions are processed to be able to like really help you out of that state in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Hey, how much time do you have?
8 minutes.
Okay. I just want to respect your time.
Yeah, I
Otherwise, I
appreciate
feel
that.
like we
I'm
could
I'm, I'm having a
just
great time.
I feel like we could just keep going for another
Yeah, yeah,
another hour.
yeah, yeah.
um, so I guess, man, I want to either talk about why you think marriages fail and micro cheating.
Oh,
If we
yeah,
can do that
for
in
sure.
8 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. So marriages fail basically for the reasons why, like we kind of already discussed. And like what that is like the natural process of emotional symbiosis where we get honeymooned and we make big life decisions and we get involved, right? And we either stay stuck in that, which usually means that like one person doesn't exist, right? Because they've collapsed parts of themselves to like maintain this relationship, and the other person like in control, if you will. Um, or and okay, three things. They usually either just maintain that. And the reason why we get into emotional symbiosis in the first place is it's biologically designed to short circuit our system for reproduction, right? Because if we figured out our own shit, why we are the way that we are, all the shit that we talked about with regards to unpacking your baggage so your kids don't have to, dude, we'd never get married and we'd never have babies and we'd be extinct. Okay. So
Yes.
most people in marriage get to a point where like I said before, it's like we start speaking up and that can sound like and look like this isn't working for me. It could sound like I want a divorce. And like as crazy as it might sound, that is one person starting the process of what's called differentiation. which when we're in emotional symbiosis, it's like, hey, we are we and we are together and like we exist together. And differentiation means I am me, you are you, but we want to be interdependent. And like you might hear things like, I just need to find myself from the husband or the wife. And that's true in a lot of ways, but that's separate from the other person because what marriage does is it's a commitment saying like I'm going to meet your needs, you're going to meet my needs, and we're going to meet our own needs. But we, like I said, we check the box accepting the terms and conditions without fucking even knowing what those are, and eventually we learn what those are, but it looks a lot like resentment or blame for the other person. Why aren't they doing this? They never do this, blah 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 blah. But a lot of times we don't realize it was really a need this whole time that we never actually explicitly asked for. Because sometimes we can just assume because we do this for them that they should do this for us. And there's all these, like, you can call them covert contracts or like agreements that we feel like we've made, but we didn't really talk about them explicitly. And we also make life more complicated during this process of not knowing. And things just naturally get taken on by either the husband or the wife until eventually it's like too much, right? So that is the best opportunity, like I said, to start to differentiate, which means like, hey, I'm going to make decisions about my life without considering you as much, and vice versa. And we are going to redecide on what a lot of things look like in our relationship, right? And that's hard because what you're doing is you're jeopardizing and you're breaking emotional symbiosis. And if you do that, that's really scary for parts of you because that means that you might get divorced or you might break up. And fuck, what else does that mean? Well, what are they going to think about that? What's society going to think about that? Like, but the kids, like, there's so much, the mortgage, the cars, the on and on and on, right? And that's usually nowadays when people are like, okay, I need help, right? Let me find a coach, let me find a therapist to like work on myself and do the work that, you were talking about, like, hey, the humble pie and looking in the mirror. Okay, so that's what healthy differentiation would be, is like, hey, let me work on why my nervous system is formed the way I am. Why does this trigger me? And this is like a pattern that we have because usually couples have like 4 to 6 patterns that they're in. And when you really dig into it and you fucking cut off the branches and you're like, what's left here? Huh? What's this feeling that I have that happens in me when my wife does this thing or vice versa? Is that feeling familiar? How familiar? Oh, it's been there a long time. Before you met your wife, before you met your husband? Interesting. So is this all about her or him, or is this about your past and her past and how that's kind of like bumping up against each other?
Yeah.
So real differentiation is sorting out that we into like what's me and what's you. What do I really want? What does she really want? And can we come back and figure that thing out, bring it all to the relationship? Because the cool part about when you actually differentiate in a healthy way, you get to come back and re-experience that emotional symbiosis and honeymoon like at a whole new level, because like you are bringing your full self to the relationship and vice versa. And the reason like why divorce like is so rampant is because people get to this spot where it's like this isn't working and they just like think it's the other person, and then they just get divorced because like in a lot of ways it's true. It's like I didn't realize what I was signing up for when I signed up for this. It's like, yes, true. And the silver lining beautiful like door that can open is guess what? Without doing that, you would never have understood fully like what like what is really in there that you really need and you really want. Because as scary as it is to like consider divorce and breakup and all the things, you're never more in touch with the things that you like really, really, really want in life. Does that make sense? And we
Yeah.
are driven by pain and avoiding difficult things more than we are going after the good stuff. And like, again, there's a lot of pain in like the idea of divorce in America. and having a mortgage and like selling a house and your social reputation and what that means for your culture and your religion and what happens to the kids, like alimony, child support, all that shit. Co-parenting, what happens like when there's another man in her life and vice versa.
Hmm.
So much potential pain where all of a sudden, when you think about it, you've got this boogeyman like in the closet or under the bed, which is like your unfinished shit that you're talking about eating humble pie and looking in the mirror. That is not so scary when you start stacking
Yeah.
all that other shit. Uh,
Yes.
so that is where like that's kind of like my idea of like basically your first question about like divorce.